Hey there. Just wanted to take a quick second and ask you guys if you're really getting value out of the show. If you really enjoy light pollution news, if you find light pollution news actually adds some value into your life, why don't you consider being a supporter? $3 a month is all we're asking for here. Surprisingly, there are a good number of costs involved. Just on the audio side, we're not even talking about content creation and social media avenues that we work on. So we could definitely use the support. We could definitely use the help. It'll help us get into to black per se, or at least to the zero. That would be great. And $3 a month. You can find a support the show link in the show notes here, or you can find it over on our website, and you can look on this show's page, and I'll have a support the show link. Also, we have a audience poll at the very end of the show. Definitely stick around for that. Be more on that at the end of the show. Light Pollution News, September 2024. What is safe? This episode, we talk about harnessing energy from space, a crime study that appears to highlight problems using satellite images to assess lighting's impact on crime, and how about a ban on digital billboards after 1 a.m.? This month, I'm joined by superstar panel from the North Coast Redwoods District of California State Parks, Shelana deSilva, researcher and lawyer Yana Yakushina, and from Dark Sky Consulting, John Barentine. New Light Pollution News is right here. Welcome back to Light Pollution News. We have a great second half of the episode for you. I'd like to welcome my guests, working to connect folks of all stripes to the majesty of Northern California's amazing redwoods and much, much more. Tide pools probably as well out there. Nice. Such a cool area. Let me welcome Shelana deSilva back to the show. And also here today is our friend, lawyer and researcher Yana Yakushina, and a man who literally never needs an introduction, Mr. John Barentine. As we begin the second half of today's show, I want to remind you at home, you can learn all about today's show by heading over to our website, lightpollutionnews.com, where we have all of the links to the show listed and some additional details. Also, be sure that you're subscribed to Light Pollution News. If not, hit that subscribe button in whatever podcast player you're listening to. You can find Light Pollution News on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or if you wish to reach out to me directly, I'm at bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Yana, before we jump into things, I know last time you were on, I want to quickly apologize because I sounded like I was not quite as reverent as I should have been to Russia's rich history and contributions to our modern space economy. I think you'll be happy to see we have a story in here that will pay a little bit of tribute to that. So we have a full show for you, so let's jump right in. I want to start off this second segment with a question for my guests. Have any of you guys taken a red eye lately? Curious about your experience.
Yeah, Bill, I was just last weekend, I was on a 16-hour flight from South Africa to the United States. And once again, I'm baffled at how airlines are using the technology with the lighting on board their aircraft, because it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. When between sort of service that they wanted people to sleep, they were illuminating the cabin with this dim blue light. And then to wake them up, they turned it to kind of a bright orange red that then became yellow, that then became white, which I think was supposed to simulate sunrise or something like that. But I'm sitting back there with a little bit of knowledge about circadian rhythms and thinking, wow, if you want people to sleep, bathing them in blue light is not the way to do it.
Anyone else? You guys had any experiences?
I have just shared John's experience. I haven't taken a red eye since last year, but I had the same reflection, John. Why is this strip of purplish blue lighting on? I'm trying to close my eyes.
Have you guys seen this? I know, I want to say Delta maybe. They have LED strips that are white. And if we were lucky enough to take an impromptu red eye back from Florida, I think, and it was idiotic. It's not a long flight between Philadelphia to anywhere in Florida, but this became a 6-hour flight, and the light would come on. It was like 2 a.m, and you're just tired. You want to go to sleep, and it will become a white light just blinding you every time. The staff need to get up and down the aisles. Oh, good times. Well, This is a much better story. In the world of aviation, Qantas is looking to ease you into your next long haul by providing cabin lighting that aligns with circadian cycles, or so they say, John. Obvious hopes of reducing that miserable sapping sensation known as jet lag. So the cabin initially experiences a sunset that transitions into a night sky with moonlight. Maybe this is where they're getting the blue, John. And then by daybreak, warm tones reappear to match a synthesized sunrise. So how about that for your next long haul? Will you guys enjoy a little more, feel a little more refreshed, feel ready to go when you get off the plane?
Depends on the length of the flight, I think. And also, I wonder how they're going to adjust to what time. The time when you're sitting on the plane. Like, for example, I'm flying from New York. I'm flying to Singapore. Like, are we going to change the flights according to Singapore time already so I don't have jet lag in the future? Or we're adjusting it to New York or somewhere in the middle? So I have a lot of questions and no answers to that.
Fantastic question, Yana. Right. What time zone is the sunset and sunrise happening at?
Well, if you fly over to Pole in the summertime, you don't have to worry about it. It'll just be on bright the whole time.
Just keep it on. There you go.
Did you know that the concept of utilizing space-based solar panels to collect energy and beam it back to Earth can be traced all the way back to the 1920s when the great Russian visionary Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who envisioned beaming light rays back to Earth's surface. 20 years later, Isaac Asimov would envision beams of microwave energy powering up the solar system. With that stage set, the next piece is a tale of two solar-powered dreams. One tale, Detroit-based company named Virtuos Solis wants to put millions of satellites into high Earth orbit to form a robotic-driven solar array for the explicit use of providing clean energy back here on Earth. In order to overcome the obvious problem of cloud cover, the array will push microwave radiation back to receiver on Earth. And then there's a company that we touched on a couple months back called Reflect Orbit. If you'll recall, Reflect Orbit plans to beam physical light back to Earth to power solar power plants well into the night. This isn't the first time the idea of harnessing space to provide terrestrial power has entered the zeitgeist. In 1970s, the U.S. government began to seriously study the feasibility of an operation. Then in 1988, the USSR deployed the experimental Zamya, I hope I'm saying that right, Zamya 2, a 65-foot mirror that shot light beams across Europe with the intent of brightening up nights. And then we have a little closer to now, in 2017, a Norwegian accountant decided it would be a great idea to erect huge mirrors above the town of which I will not be able to say this, but I'm just going to say Hoken, hopefully that's close, to reduce instances of seasonal depression in dark northern winters. So while these ideas previously were the purview of science fiction, it appears that the actual funding is starting to flow to test all these concepts as we slowly head towards this coming boom in the space economy. I stumbled across an article by Jennifer Sensiba at Clean Technica, and I wanted to run her thoughts and fears by you guys to see if we can get the over-under on the probability of these taking place. Sensiba rips into the Reflect Orbit satellite plan that will deploy 57 mirrors to bounce light beams back to Earth. The light beams that, I may add, create a construction-like halo per last time. I still am not sure what a construction-like halo looks like. Anyway, Sensiba asks, what about an extension service for Alaskan towns in the winter to enable them to essentially have daylight for a few hours? Or how about utilization by militaries engaged in combat operations who want to keep the zone bright for 24/7 to maintain, situational awareness? What are your thoughts on this? Is this the future we're going to?
I mean, weirdly enough, I'm currently working on an article about space-based solar panels together with Juliana and Camila, brilliant space lawyers. And we basically analyzed the preliminary research and like the reports which ESA has, for example, most of these reports, they indicate that this space-based solar panels are the future. They're aligned with carbon neutrality for every country, and we all have to lead there. But the idea was around our article we're working on, what about other environmental impacts? Because if you look into the report, they only saying how good is it, how carbon neutral it is, what benefits it will bring, and they don't consider any other problems with it. So we decided to work on that. And one of the main aspects of the article is actually what are the questions of reflectivity of the solar panels, because we looked in a really like the documents which were prepared by this project, some of them you mentioned, and also the project like Solaris project by ESA. And all of this report, they don't say anything about the reflectivity. They don't consider any mitigation measures or anything, but we're talking here about putting giant mirrors in the Earth's atmosphere. Another aspect of it here, to build up this, I don't know even how, it's a lot of satellites which going to again circulate around Earth orbit, and some of them form a giant mirror. It will require a lot of launches again to build it up. And then they're planning to build it up in a low orbit and then kind of put it higher to like reduce the amount of collisions with it. But I have a lot of questions how we're going to build up in this low orbit these giant objects if we already have a lot of space debris and a lot of other space objects and we keep sending more objects there. So there's again a lot of questions. And another aspect of it, the transmitters. So we're here talking about the ground-based or terrestrial. Basically, it's solar panels on the ground. But we need minimum 35-kilometer radius to set these transmitters up. And I'm like, how it should be close to the cities, so where we need the energy. So how do we decide what we are doing with the land use, what are the other environmental impacts? Because if you even look at already existing ground-based solar panels, we're coming back to the discussion on the previous episode when we were talking about the introduction of the new technology, when we actually have to think what are we bringing extra? I mean, except the benefits, which the obvious benefits, right? With good energy, clean energy, we also can think about the other potential impacts. And another question, which is also important, and it leads us to the discussion of the freedom of exploration of outer space, freedom of use of outer space, the interesting aspect, how do we use this energy? Who will be responsible? The question of distribution of this energy also very important, because space is for everybody. But if, for example, European Union puts this mirror there, how do we distribute this energy across Europe? Like, there's a lot of questions which we have, and we hopefully will reflect it in the article we're working on. So this would be my thought on it.
Yana, I can't wait to read your article. So I do hope you'll share it with all of us when it's ready. And when we think about the need for sustainable energy sources and all of the innovations that are happening right now, the technologies that are being brought to bear, it is an exciting time. And as Yana said, we have to look at the cumulative impact of not just the deployment of these technologies, but also the development of them, what we're using, the materials we're using, where we're getting those materials, how these projects are designed, where they're located. I mean, some of the larger solar arrays that are being proposed to be built in desert habitats are impacting threatened and endangered species, right? Migration as well as their home habitats. So I think there's so much there that we need to look at. I mean, when you're looking at batteries, for example, and minerals that are being extracted from indigenous lands, right? And the violation of sovereignty and indigenous treaties in that practice, there's so many layers to it. And so I think I don't want to sound like I'm stymieing innovation or not interested in looking at some of these technologies, but to your points, Yana, and the questions that you're bringing up, there's a lot that we have to resolve before we can point to these as our savior.
Shelana, you bring up some good things. I know in the past we had an article here discussing a reservation area out in Nevada that they're going to try and use as a battery, essentially. Right. And the reservation was like, well, we use that water. That's what we that's our what that's
right.
We use that for multiple things, multiple uses. So it does bring a good point. I've always thought, for solar panels, we have parking lots, and no one, at least on the East Coast, no one likes the rain and snow. So why not just put the solar panels on top of the parking lots, because they're everywhere. There's more parking lots than trees around here. So just saying, it's interesting, Yana. I have this little piece here. The United States Development Program was looking at space economy become a $546 billion marketplace, right? And in that, we have all of these issues. Like you have space debris, light pollutions, the equity, all these different issues. And we have stuff happening that just feels, I guess the best way to say is tech bro-y. You know, like it feels like that. It feels like we're coming up with ways to get investment money to have these crackpot ideas, and no one's looking at any of the externalities around those ideas.
The main problem here is lack of regulation. Like I think because we have just 5 international space agreements, I may even say 4, because Moon Treaty is not really ratified by the biggest countries involved in the space race. And we're currently in need of kind of binding agreements on space sustainability, which will involve the mitigation techniques, the prevention of space debris specifically, and the question about the decommissioning of all of this. Because I don't like the discussions when let's put the International Space Station just down to the ocean. Like oceans are the only thing which are left more or less untouched on Earth. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's a giant pit. Come on, it's a natural landfill. Yeah. Just launch everything in there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll move away from space for a little bit. And yeah, thank you so much for the great insight into that. We have this intriguing study on crime, and it appears to be kind of a emblematic study, in my mind, on all of the studies of crime. The crimes they assessed were assault, burglary, theft, robbery, by utilizing city data, but also using VIIR's images of street light density in Vienna, Austria. The researchers looked at crime data in Vienna from 2004, and the type of data, this data is actually readily available here in the U.S. for most major cities. You can go to the police or the public safety website. So if you aren't already aware, you can go and actually look up a lot of this data on your own. Vienna switched over to LED streetlights in 2017. And at the same time, Vienna began experiencing an overall reduction in crime. The study utilized 2 different methodological frameworks to assess the lighting's impact on crime. First, descriptive analysis. It appears that to indicate that LED conversions reduce crime and emphasized the success of tactical lighting systems to enhance safe environments, as is apparent by the steady decrease in crime over that time span. Then the inferential analysis indicates a strong relationship between streetlight density and nighttime crimes, most notably burglaries, but other crimes including assaults, theft, and robbery all shared positive association to a lesser degree. So what does it all mean? This feels very much like our crime studies, like the whole field of it. But John, maybe I'm wrong on this. What was your take on this study?
No, you're not wrong about that, Bill. I saw this when it came out, and I'm just not buying it. And I'm not buying it for a couple of reasons. At best, they have correlation that's built on shaky foundations, but they don't have causation. As with almost every crime study that I've seen that looks at the influence of outdoor lighting, the least of which because they are reliant upon satellite remotely sensed nighttime lights data. Was in Vienna a few weeks ago, firsthand view of the situation on the ground, and I can see all kinds of problems with using that data source to try to figure out whether outdoor light at night is having any particular impact on crime. So I think this needs to be taken with a very large grain of salt. You know, you read the study and the authors kind of in the end, they can't quite fully explain what they have either. And if you put it into and alongside the canon of other research that we have on this subject, I think the matter is hopelessly confused. One thing that I can say for sure is that there's nothing like what the health researchers would refer to as a dose-response relationship. So in other words, they cannot tell you, if I add X amount of light to this space, it becomes safer by Y amount. There's nothing like that at all. It's very highly context dependent, but you will get people who latch onto this stuff. They see it, well, you know, this is published scientific evidence. It's obviously more light means that our streets will be safer, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah, when I read that, my first thought in my mind was, well, was there a general trend beforehand of reduced crime? Like we have, at least here in the U.S., we've had a general trend for the past 25 years of reduced crime minus COVID. And then, because when you look at seeing that there's a correlation with, you know, burglaries and whatnot with light, to me, maybe are you putting the light in areas that already have high crime and they just haven't solved the impetus of those crimes? Like, these are thoughts that I had when I was reading it. and read these crime studies, and to your John, exactly, like there doesn't seem to be a boots on the ground kind of analysis of the variables in place. And you're trying to use, I don't know why you use light. I guess that's the other thing I don't understand. Why is light the magical secret weapon? Are the other avenues for research all taken? Like, policing and community assistance and community connections and stuff like.
I will just admit my cynical take on that. The issues of crime are the sort of foundations of why we see crime in our cities, in our towns across the U.S., anywhere, are so complicated. And we know this, right? There are socioeconomic factors, there are mental health factors, there are inequities, the list goes on and on and on. And I understand the human need to seek out a simple fix. And it's not that lighting design is simple. That's not what I'm saying. But I think I can understand why decision makers at a municipal level might say, you know what? If I have the right lights here, these problems are going to go away. And we just know that it's not that simple. It's not going to be that easy. Switching on a new switch isn't gonna fix these problems. We have to go so much deeper, and we need intersectional approaches when we think about issues like crime.
I wonder if, a lot of these crime studies, I feel like I could recreate many of these studies, but not use light, use like GDP per capita or some kind of economic indicator and say, oh, look, the city's gotten richer, so crime's decreased. And then you just say, oh, well, all we need to do is make everyone rich and you don't have crime. I don't think that's an answer.
Right.
Like that.
The main problem here and the main question here, who is the funding agency of this research? Is it a lighting company? Like where the money come from? Because I think the conclusions are would correlate with what they want to see. And also on that, there also was recently published a pretty recent research also on the relation of crime and artificial light at night. They also used the remote sensing data, but they basically were assessing what are the brightest areas, like what are the brightest countries, let's put it that way, and what is the feeling of safety. And weirdly enough, Belgium is one of the most lead polluted countries, but the feeling of unsafety is the highest. So here you go. At the same time, there is research which basically completely the opposite of what you just mentioned. So,
and I feel like there's a lot of factors that are going into the unsafe, and I don't feel like the lighting is probably the prime factor. But maybe I didn't read the study, so I don't know. But it's just a guess. Well, since we're here on the nuisance side, this study comes at the same time that we've had this fascinating and weird story playing out in Traverse City, Michigan. Amelia Hasenor sued Immaculate Conception Elementary School essentially for light trespass by arguing that the school was in violation of city's lighting ordinance. The courts then ordered the school to apply shielding to the lighting, and the courts also demanded the school turn off the offending lights until mitigation efforts were applied. At the time of the story, Immaculate Conception Elementary School has yet to install shieldings on their lighting. Instead of complying with the court order, the school has been fined $100 per day for leaving the lights both on and without the appropriate shielding. The court also awarded Hasenor $1,000 in attorney fees. Kathy Nelson, on the other hand, who's affiliated with the school, unsurprisingly has a different take. Nelson justifies the school leaving the lights on for fear of safety and security. Per the article in the Record Eagle, the school security system needs the lights to function properly, with teachers potentially arriving after dark to prepare their classrooms. To her credit, the school has installed $30,000 dimming system and ordered $20,000 in new lighting to meet the ordinance requirements. There should be noted that the dimming system's effectiveness has been disputed by the neighbor contesting the lighting, which means it's not really dimming much. It should also be noted that Traverse City decided to update their ordinance to allow for roughly 1,000 lumen emissions from outdoor lighting, a sharp change from what was in place before. As far as I can tell, as there's no real authoritative reasoning on that, except for that 1,100 was a lower tiered midway point between 450 lumens and 2,500 lumens, which the city had previously had a variable code requirement for depending on the actual object. Then, of course, there's a great quote here, very bizarre quote of City Plan Director for Traverse City, Sean Winter. 100% cutoff shielding on all outdoor lights is almost impossible to enforce. So there's multiple things at play here. School installed bright lights, with no shielding, violated code, bled in neighbor's yard, neighbor sued, all counts as one, despite the fact nothing at all has changed. The city, in turn, watching the court go through its ordinances, decide to firm up its own code. Why is the middle ground so hard to attain in these situations? Surely Asenlor doesn't want the teachers operating in an environment that's unsafe, but at the same time, the consideration is denied to her by the school, as it appears it doesn't want to take up any culpability for any actions that have impeded on her.
What is safe? When we talk about safety, I'm really glad that in the previous question that Yana brought up the notion of feelings of safety. And I wanted to point out the work of my colleague, Boris Portnov at the University of Haifa in Israel, who's done some very good research on this in recent years. It looked into what his group calls feelings of safety, where they look at lighting treatments in different cities, and then they ask survey respondents to rate their comfort level with being in those spaces at night. And one of the really important takeaways from Boris's work is that it does not take much light in the environment to increase those feelings of safety very quickly. If you go from no light at all to a relatively low amount of light, you get a big jump in the respondents' perception of the safety of those spaces. But what his work also points out is that as you go to higher and higher and higher light levels, that flattens out very quickly. So it's an issue of diminishing returns. If you want to double the feelings of safety at a given light level, as the light gets brighter, you have to add a lot more before you get that doubling response, or whatever your metric is. We don't have a lot of information about what is really safe in the sense of personal security, again, because the research is all mixed up on this. But even the basics of what, visibility at night and seeing obstacles or seeing tripping hazards or whatever your concern is about safety, it's a lot more intuitive and a lot less based on evidence. So for one thing that we could very definitely improve is backing these recommendations with real evidence. But at the end of the day, Bill, for some people, they're not going to feel safe no matter how much light you give them. I mean, humans are afraid of the dark. Organizations, whether it's municipal governments or school districts or whoever, they're all afraid of getting sued, at least here in the United States, because we're a very litigious society. And they feel like the only way to protect themselves is to make the outdoor nighttime space more like daytime, in a belief that that will assuage these fears and that people will be able to do what they need to do. So bottom line, yes, we need to provide light for real safety that actually improves the situation on the ground. But going overboard in the other direction is not the way to do it. And we have the evidence that backs that as well.
Well, I just want to build on what John is sharing, because I think so much of the story you brought up, Bill, is really about how do we be good neighbors to each other, right? There's a school that's trying to operate. There are neighbors who want it to be dark at night. Both of these needs are relevant and important. And when I think we can, as dark sky advocates, dark and quiet sky advocates, it's our jobs to educate people on how they can be good neighbors while holding on to these outcomes that we see are so important. And I do think it is, in this case, about that education, so that we can kind of demystify where and how do you feel safe and why. It's not because of this bright light, right? There's so many other factors happening in your town, in your society, that are contributing to these feelings of safety, your perceptions of am I safe or not, and it's not about the light that's shining above you. And I think educating people on what you gain from a dark sky, how you can keep yourself safe, your community safe, the sort of social responsibility we have in there. I know I'm speaking to a lot of kind of complex themes here, but I do think it is about that education piece. So that's how we kind of navigate these seemingly different needs of a school versus a neighbor. They're in fact not, and helping them find what they have in common around these issues, I think, is important for us as dark sky advocates.
And the school probably wouldn't have had the lawsuit if you saw the fixtures are these tubular fixtures with a cap at the top. So the light is actually in the middle and it's going out in all directions. If they used top-down lighting, they probably wouldn't have had this issue, and they could provide safety. Part of it's the way it's engineered, right? If the basic engineering of the parking area was set up in a way that it had considered its effects on its neighbors, this wouldn't have happened. And they could still provide that feeling of safety, right? Well, here's a different type of story for a similar batch, but a different take on how you can make things a little better. So a positive story out of Westchester, Pennsylvania. Some folks wanted to protect fireflies at Everhart Park from a new, very bright, white, clean street light designed to cascade in all directions, per the Westchester Borough Councilman Bernie Flynn. The initial lighting plan from Westchester, of course, paid zero amount of attention to health or ecological impact. However, this spurred State Senator Carolyn Comita. I will add that Carolyn Comita has been at the forefront of much of the dark sky work in Pennsylvania's legislature. So she has decided to move in and work with the borough to try and carve out small ecological space in a borough. And at first, they dimmed the lighting down to 85%. They didn't see much of a change in the apparent brightness. However, the two officials, Flynn and Comita, then worked together on installing shielding on the lights around the park. And going forward, the residents should also expect to see one light in the park turned off. The end goal was to see if proper angling and the elimination of light trespass in the park can help repopulate firefly activity. There's a positive story of how you can work with the community and work with essentially the community's goals and still provide safety in a space, right? Okay. Moving to some good news. How are you guys on digital billboards? You guys like those? I know.
I've got strong feelings, Bill.
I know. I'm like,
yeah. Well, they're everywhere except for evidently down in Australia. Melbourne is contemplating requiring digital billboards to be turned off after midnight to sunrise on most days of the week, with a 1 a.m. curfew on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. One exemption to be noted: if a business is open, it may continue lighting its digital billboard through the time period that it's open. Cited in the city council proposal are ecological, environmental, and health effects from light pollution. This is a part of a general revision to Melbourne's lighting code, which aims to direct the city towards its own identity versus other major cities in the general Asia-Pacific region. I highly recommend you at home, should you feel so inclined, just take a look at a policy proposal. It's pretty interesting. It's well done and could aid communities in helping implement much of the same. I will note that there's been no updates on the story since the lead up to the recording of today's show. So I don't know how that fared or what's going on with that there. And then we'll move over to ecology. And Shelana, this is your wheelhouse here. We kick off the ecology segment with an article by Olivia Ferrari over at National Geographic. Researchers in China took to learning about artificial light at night, the impact that artificial light at night has on tree populations in Beijing. Found under artificial light two trees. The two trees they looked at, Japanese pagoda and the green ash tree, universally had tougher leaves, showing reduced evidence of insect activity on them. There appeared to be a correlation between light intensity and a reduced sign of insect predation. The researchers involved weren't able to identify the cause of the toughness of the leaves. They hypothesized that perhaps the artificial light is extending the tree's photosynthesis. Their concern in this case lies with the fact that our ever-disappearing insect populations, specifically artificial light at night, is providing an environment inhospitable to nighttime insect activity. And hence, it goes without saying, up the food chain poses risks to other insects that prey on those insects and then birds that prey on insects and higher order predators. From the Journal of Birds, it appears that artificial light at night affects the circadian rhythms of captive budgerigars. The birds commonly known as budgies were exposed to shortwave blue light between 200 nanometers to 460 nanometers for a duration of anywhere from 0 to 90 minutes during the night. Researchers measured the body mass, number of eggs laid, the success of hatchlings, and the circadian rhythm marker of melatonin sulfate. From this, the researchers found a correlation between the duration of blue light exposure at night to increased body mass, a decreased number of eggs laid, and a decreased hatchling success, and also a suppression of the melatonin sulfate levels. Turtles made the news this month, pretty much for everything you would expect. A Turkish team set out to measure artificial light at night at 13 Mediterranean beaches in Turkey. Their study in the Turkish Journal of Zoology found that many of the most important beaches for hatchlings also experience a high degree of artificial light at night. Obviously, they're recommending such communities become aware of their impact and institute improvements to help protect sea turtles. And then finally, on the ecology side, the Journal of Mammalogy, researchers looked at the native rodent, the Pacific kangaroo rat, and California sage scrub. Specifically, they wanted to understand how the increasing coastal nighttime brightness impacted rat behavior. Researchers found a correlation between artificial light intensity and reduced foraging behavior. This aligns with past studies on rodent activity and artificial light at night. So there we have. There's our ecology wrap up for the month. Shelana, I see you nodding your head over there.
Yeah, I'm nodding my head with happiness, Bill, and thank you for kind of sharing all of these studies and some of the results at a high level. I mean, even the story you told about the fireflies in Pennsylvania and some of the decision making around protecting some of their habitat, and then all of these studies you just talked about in the sort of ecological realm, they're all of this is contributing to something really important, which is our further understanding of light as a pollutant. In conservation and in stewardship, we use species as our surrogates for making good decisions on the ground, right? So whether it's decisions about which land should be protected and restored because it contains the last of the world's remaining coast redwoods, or we're looking at the northern spotted owl here and how that implicates resource extraction, timber operations, development, all of that, how we balance all of that out. The way we do that is by understanding impacts to these species. So these animals, these plants are essentially our guideposts to say, okay, humans, if you're going to do these actions, this is what happens to me over here. And until we understand that correlation and what that means for these species and their longevity, and thereby the impacts to our own drinking water, clean air, food systems, etc., we need to be able to study these things, study these impacts. And all of the studies you described are helping us sharpen our pencil about the impacts of light pollution on these natural systems. So I'm here for it. I love it.
Thank you, Shelana. Well, since you're here, hey, do you want to plug yourself? We have one more story to cover, but I want to give my guests a chance to, talk a little bit about themselves, how you can find the work you're doing, Shelana, and yeah, why don't you tell the listener at home how they can find more about you?
Oh, I would love to share a little bit about my home landscape, Bill. Thank you. So I work for the North Coast Redwoods District of California State Parks. We have a unique partnership with the National Park Service on the north end of my district, Redwood National and State Parks. We welcome across our district, which goes from the Oregon border all the way down to northern Mendocino. We welcome upwards of 3 million visitors annually. This is the place to be if you want to see towering coast redwoods enshrouded in fog. You want to see beautiful, rugged coastline, black sand beaches, tide pools. We've got it all. We've got elk, we've got bear, we've got everything that you could possibly want to see in terms of North Coast wilderness and beauty, and a number of amazing communities here, indigenous and settler communities who are contributing to this place with so much cultural diversity, art, music, you name it, and good food. So please come and visit us here in the Redwoods.
I will definitely second that. That was one of the most spectacular places in the U.S., without a doubt.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move over to you, Yana. I know it's late for you, and we're going to get you to bed in a second. So
yeah,
how can people learn more
Shelana,
about everything that you're doing?
Thank you. Shelana just sold me the trip, by the way.
You got to do it.
I'm waiting for you to come and visit me. I've got so many things to show you. Come on.
Yeah, you got to do it. You got to go out there and visit her.
Okay, amazing. Speaking about my work, currently, we're now soon, hopefully, we'll launch a campaign with supporting Light Pollution Manifesto in Europe. It's going to be a website where people can read it and sign it. I hope I will share it soon. But the best way to connect with me and read about my work and get in touch with all the amazing discussions which I'm trying to raise there is via LinkedIn. So I welcome everybody there.
And Yana, you're very active on LinkedIn, so you definitely can reach out there, and Yana will definitely have a few words of, she'll be able to have a good conversation. So highly recommend it. Find Yana on LinkedIn. John, where can people learn more about everything you do, your consultancy, and how to get to the Access Cash part of your business.
Yeah, right. Fortunately, I have an unusual surname. So if you Google me, you'll find all the various things that I'm involved in. I encourage people to take a look at my website, which is darkskyconsulting.com, which in addition to talking about the stuff that I do professionally, there's a lot of resources linked there for people who are interested in getting involved in dark skies. I write articles on a monthly basis on all aspects of the topic, and it's a great place to start.
Excellent. Well, this last one, again, this month we're going to close up the show on a sad note. But, you know, I'd be remiss not to mention the passing of David Crawford. John, did you know David?
I did.
Do you have anything you'd like to say before I go through?
I'll tell you the one little anecdote about Dave that was fantastic. When I first met him, and I had just started work at IDA and started managing the International Dark Sky Places program, which at the time had, a couple of dozen designations. This was a little more than 10 years ago. And Dave, in his usual way, kind of sized me up and he said, I thought by now there'd be thousands of those places. And I think my jaw must have just hit the floor at that point, knowing what goes into that. But he was so forward looking in that respect that it was very easy for Dave to look at the landscape and say, basically, why isn't every park in the world part of this? And it was definitely exemplary of his vision for where he wanted the organization to go.
Well, many of you know David Crawford as being a founding member of the International Dark Sky Association. Crawford was also a tenured astronomer at Kitt Peak National Observatory in Tucson. Crawford obtained his PhD from University of Chicago while working at the Yerkes Observatory. In 1960, he moved to Kitt Peak, where he founded the Dark Sky office with Bill Robinson. The duo worked with municipalities and other observatories to help promote filterable low-pressure sodium lights. However, similar to our LED conversions, low-pressure sodium conversion didn't go off without hiccups. An amateur astronomer named Tim Hunter found his skies orange, and as a nearby facility utilized unshielded lighting. That oversight on shielding eventually formed a friendship and alliance between Hunter and Crawford that culminated in the founding of International Dark Sky Association in 1988. Crawford became a member of the Illuminating Engineering Society and collaborated with individuals across multiple disciplines, including lawyers, lighting professionals, manufacturers, and government. And due to Crawford's dogged efforts, he helped make lighting shielding a standard. David Crawford passed on July 22nd at the age of 93. His impact on promoting awareness of the need for nighttime protections garnered Tim Hunter to consider him to be one of the greatest environmentalists of the 20th century and the early 21st centuries. Rest in peace, David. Unfortunately, the crucible that Mr. Crawford went through remains a battle today, and we've actually, I feel like, shifted a little backwards in time in our haste to install LEDs. So I want to thank you guys here, my guests. I want to thank you for joining me today. I want to thank you at home for listening all the way through. And thank you so much for Yana, John, and Shelana. You guys are amazing. This is an excellent afternoon I got to spend with you guys. And I hope the listeners at home are equally as entertained and now knowledgeable about some of these very, very, I guess, complicated topics that we discussed today. So as a reminder, Light Pollution News is recorded towards the end of each month. This month, we recorded a show on August 25th, and you can find all the details included in today's show over at lightpollutionnews.com. If you have any questions or thoughts, you want to say hi, you can simply text us via the link in the show notes. Email us at bill@lightpollutionnews.com. Signing off, I'm your host, Bill McGeaney. Thanking you for listening. Remember, only to shine the light where it's needed. This episode's poll question is this: do you think that satellites will be used to provide daylight to towns on the extreme ends of latitude? And you can text over your response via the text to show button within the show notes within the podcast player you're listening to. That's a free text, and we look forward to hearing your answers.